Mhm. What about Russia, John? Russia, obviously, they are having probably less and less relationship with the European countries, which they previously enjoy a lot in terms of trade. But now they are turning to Asian countries, for example, or Africa. So in a couple of years, now they are quite weak economically because of the sanctions. What about, in 3 years' time or in 5 years' time? Are their relationship with China, India, other Asian countries going to, replace or at least fill this the empty room, left probably in their relationship with the European countries?
I think that has to happen. It's hard to imagine trade relations between Russia and Europe going back to what they were before the war broke out. And that's especially true of German-Russian relations. It is possible that those relations, those trade relations, will improve somewhat in the distant future, but I think it's going to take a long time for that to happen. And in the meantime, the Russians have very powerful incentives to replace their trade relations, their lost trade relations in Europe with increased trade relations with countries like India and countries like China and countries in places like Africa. And you see much evidence of that already happening, and I think you'll see more of it moving forward. There's a great deal of talk in the West about the fact that sanctions have failed. There's no doubt that sanctions have hurt the Russian economy somewhat, but not very much, nowhere near as much as people expected. And one of the reasons for that is that the Russians have been able to replace their trade relations or their trade with the West with trade with other countries, to include China and India.
The latest news being that the U.S. bombed this Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Will that have any effect on Washington's relationship with Brussels?
I don't think so. I think the key question is whether or not it will have an effect on U.S.-German relations, because Nord Stream belonged to the Germans and the Russians, not to Brussels. And the question is, what will the Germans do? It's difficult to say for sure, but my guess is that the Germans will complain somewhat. But in the end, the Germans will not complain too much, because the Germans are in good part subservient to the Americans. The Americans basically call the shots in Europe. And when you're involved in a war over Ukraine and the Germans are allied with the United States against Ukraine, and when the United States provides security for Germany, you have a situation where there are real limits to what the Germans can do in terms of complaining about the whole Nord Stream experience. So I don't think it's going to matter that much in the end.
Mm-hmm.